Hello everyone, I'm Tank. Sorry for the inconvenience. I'm pretty bad at configuring the monitor apparently. And I've been here last year to talk about HTML5 game development. And just a few days before that, I signed with a new company called Kano, which I'm going to talk to you about later. So since then, my pretty much daily mission has been working on a product that could teach as fast as possible to kids about technology, hardware, and software. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. Teaching technology has been a hot topic recently since basically programming has been introduced in the British school curriculum at a very young age, and it's been very discussed. So I'm going to talk about the current scenario a little bit and then my experience and make some bridges. And I'm going to do all of this from the speaker view with my notes because because otherwise, yeah, I think the other window was shut. So, Generation Z, talking about the current scenario, that is the term we use to describe roughly the demographic of people born after 1995 and still ongoing. We have very little idea because a lot of these generations still haven't hit the adult or the professional life. We don't know how they're going to approach technology in their adult or professional life. Little that we know is the word we sort of presenting around them as the development community and the word of tech and apps and environment of products that we're shaping around them. So we live in an age of channels. There's no doubt. It's pretty easy right now, and we're going towards making it even easier to stream every piece of content to your We're making it pretty easy to stream every type of piece of content to your desktop, laptop, smartphone, tablet, wristwatch, or glasses. Although I don't think we live in an age of content first anymore. So what was cool about the web when it boomed, and we were coming from an age in which radio and television were probably the two main channels, so there was a very, very small percentage of the population deciding what the rest of the world would be consuming. And with web, people, when it was simple enough, people would just start creating and shaping the world of information they see around. While now that technology is getting more and more complex again, we're kind of getting back to the surface. Again, we have a lot of layers up on web technologies and a variety of tools, and people are getting, I think, a bit further and back to the consumer side. So I think even though the mobile era is great and is bringing a lot of innovation, what touchscreens have been doing so far is give us new way to touch, slide, swipe, and scratch the surface. While when I approached technology for the first time, what I really found cool was going deeper and how simple it was to find that side of the stack attractive. And it was really simple. So I say this is important. Making and being on the other side of things is important because we are frustration-driven creatures. I think what drives progress in technology and is the fact that we're unsatisfied of what's around, and we're always going to try to create something that best suits our needs and requirements. And that is what makes us rewarded about work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how my passion for technology started, and I think it's a story maybe a few people can relate here, maybe pretty much anyone had a similar story to a degree. But for most people, technology started like this. At least to a lot of people, even in the room that I talked to, it started with a Commodore 64 being dumped in the room when they were children or whatever. And after the painful experience of getting games running and finishing those really simple games, the experience was pretty much shit. So they started programming. The technology was sort of simpler, a bit tougher to go through maybe, but you couldn't do much else, so they started creating. For me, it started a little bit different because I come from a different background. Not this slide, this slide. So when I was about 7, my dad, which is a musician, but he had a brief career in IT, he had a lot of spare parts, so he dumped a computer made with spare parts in my room. And I started tinkering with it. There was no games on it. It was like Windows 95 because I'm pretty young. And after I was done playing Minesweeper, the only sort of icon that attracted me on the launch bar was this red icon with a black and white eye on it, which was Photoshop 4. I was really attracted by the launch screen and because of all the psychedelic stuff going on it. And I loaded a sample images, and I ended up playing with the channels panel. And for the first time, I realized that I had an actual impact on things when I disabled some RGB channels, and actually I was doing nothing. But I seen the screen change, and for once, I wasn't on the user side. I was making something, not really, but I thought so. So I kept tinkering with Photoshop for months until eventually I could create some of those cheesy images with gradients and simple selection paths and brushes. And a few months after that, my dad again dumped me in front of the computer. This time it was open, and he wanted me to replace some spare parts, and I was scared as hell, because I didn't want to break anything, etc., etc. And my dad pretty much told me to break things, explain me what the pieces were, and it was actually really simple, because at the time, computers weren't very small sealed black boxes like this one, and it was pretty simple to look at it and go, okay, change this piece. So after breaking the computers a few times, I eventually learned how to put together my computers, and that was probably the most empowering and magical sensation I've ever. So why does people... a lot of people get scared of approaching technology from that kind of point of view, even though, again, we're not talking about people in this room, but the general people, the general demographic. So one of the reasons is we kind of tend to market it like this. So this is what the word considers programming to be. It's a white skinny dude closed in a dark room with delivery pizza and a lot of empty cups of coffee, crisps all over the table, working on a matrix-style terminal, building something that no one else understands. Well, really, when I was 8, this was it for me. I was a wizard, and I had magic powers. And I think the best definition that I've been given of programming was, of what someone got passionate about programming for, was my friend Giovanni Lodi, which is a very good engineer, but also gives simple explanations, which is pretty key. And he told me he was reading this book, Aragon, which was a fantasy book with dragons and such and magic. And in a passage, it's explaining what magic is. And magic is nothing more about, for Aragon than the knowledge of a set of words and a language which, used through the years, gave so much meaning that these words can influence the world around them. So programming is nothing more than magic. It's the exact textbook definition of Aragon of magic. It's words that do stuff without the need of material. So programming for me, programming, again, something similar started like this. I was going for a holidays, 3 days, with my grandmother in the mountains. I was going to get bored as hell, so I got this book from my dad's shelf. It was very attractive for me because I was a very weird 8, 9 years old, whatever. And I was really attracted by these forms and cheesy stuff going on, especially those background patterns tidying up in gray and white. I thought they were awesome, but hey, it was the 90s, so they probably were really elegant. And I spent 3 days in the mountains consuming this book. I got back, built my first web page in 3 hours, got my dad up there, and I was like, yeah, this is going to work. I'm going to open the page, and it's just going to load. And nothing worked. So my father taught me about pretty much the concept of iterating till it works, bang your head against the screen. And that's something that in most disciplines you don't really learn. You usually learn a lot of theory, and then the thing pretty much works. In technology, there's just an exact moment in which it blinks, and again, boom, I was feeling empowered like never. So how are we teaching programming right now? My main point by telling this story is not about HTML 3.2, of course, but it's about the fact that learning happens. You dump a child in a room with any sort of tool. It can be a drum kit, it can be a set of paintings or a guitar, and eventually he's going to become an artist of some sort, because that's what a child is supposed to do. It's supposed to go against things fearlessly, loving breaking them and loving the sort of progress, and just enjoy its time, while we are more used to failure and we are scared of wasting our time. So how are we learning programming right now? Well, that's the white skinny dude stereotype again. Well, there's a few problems in it. Often we are teaching tech for the sake of tech. So the language comes first. I'm gonna teach or learn Java because it's gonna give me career prospects, but maybe before. or I'm going to just learn something because I want to learn something specific, while tech is really relevant, it's boring, it's just a tool, it's those magic powers that allow us to do great things, and we should focus really on the great things, or at least that's my opinion. Then tech is fast changing. You haven't got the time to write a book about a technical skill or something, it becomes irrelevant in the market. And this is going to happen to pretty much any type of tech. Tech is not Microsoft Office. It sounds a bit like an overstatement, it sounds weird, but the point is, even though here we all know what IT is, a lot of kids when they're 60 years old in a lot of education systems like in Italy or in England, they're dumped in a room in what they call IT lab, and they're taught how to compile Excel spreadsheets and make nice presentations with PowerPoint. There's no wonder kids hate that technology, because if they think that's it. Then we are raised to be afraid. Again, we are pushed to not break things, not play with things we don't know, while really that's the only way to learn. By many other fields in my work, even if you don't break things. So tech changes fast, but what entertains us doesn't. So games like Pong or Space Invaders or Snake or even the most recent Minecraft have such simple game mechanics that they could entertain it years ago, and they will still be there to entertain us in 50 years. And they're great ways to show what you can achieve with few lines of code or very simple programs. So that's a good way to teach kids programming, because other than the fact that they've never seen Snake, they seem to enjoy it anyway. Then, for kids that don't like games, that there's other things to teach them or to motivate them. There's things like generative art, and you can use processing or processing.js to do pretty much any sort of visual graphic illustration, or there's ways to play music with code, for example, Sonic Pi, etc. So what works? There's three very simple principles to me that can motivate not only kids, but any beginner to learn coding, and I think we should all apply them to sort of get people in it. Instant reward is the first, so no one is going to go through all the syntax, the syntactic pain and low-level implementation details if you don't show them the sort of cool stuff that you can do with code. So get them started on something pre-existing again, like editing a pre-existing game, and show them the power of just moving a couple lines of code about. Experience and design. We often undervalue it, especially in the open source community. But often we are creating learning tools and we are checking them on GitHub, and really the only people that will use them are other developers. So experience and design is always overrated, I think, underrated in the development community. But if I didn't find attractive the Photoshop 4 icon, which wasn't even that great, or that book because I was a weird child, I would have never found out about two of my passions, development and design, and never got that job that I love going to any day. Then tools and choice. Offer an environment of choice, because again, games might be not everyone's cup of tea, or music or design, but at least anyone will find attractive to them. So at Kano, we try to merge these three ingredients in the product we've been creating. So last year, I joined the company, and the prototype that I've been shown by the co-founders was looking like this, literally. It was basically a shoebox containing the cheapest, simplest possible computer out there, which is the Raspberry Pi. I think anyone in here knows what the Raspberry Pi is, more or less. If you don't, it's basically a Linux board, an integrated computer of the size of a credit card, and it costs about $35. And the problem is, in order to get started using this as a learning tool, there's a lot of pieces missing that, again, the mainstream public have difficulties putting together, like the right cables and the right devices, the keyboard, etc. So we bundled it with a book explaining with very simple words and illustrations how to use it and put it together. And then we created an environment of apps on Raspbian and modified pre-existing ones to allow kids to hack on Pong or Minecraft using visual programming, and everything is coming out the box as simple as possible. And 8 years old get it without pretty much the need of any help. And after 1.5 years of work, the product looked like this. So we produced and manufactured our own hardware, and keyboard and color-coded cables to explain the responsibility of each component in a simple way. We redesigned the books and created a lot of apps that are on the OS and customized the Raspbian enough to call it our own OS, optimize performance and the kernel to boot in pretty much 50% the time of Raspbian, have our own Windows manager, and we pretty much made it the simplest possible experience. So again, open source is great, and we have been using these open source tools as our main ingredient and bundling them in a story. But I'm running out of time, so I might just skip this slide. Then we're using visual programming. Again, we're using this library from Google that is open source called Blockly JS, which is pretty much JavaScript, an implementation in the browser of Scratch, and we plugged it into an hybrid app with Minecraft and Pong so they can make buildings with it. Then Snake, this is pretty much LXJS contribution to it, because last year when I gave my talk, after the talk, I sat back in the audience, and with my very short attention span, I started hacking this terminal version of Snake. I finished it when I was on my flight back to London, then open sourced it, my colleagues liked it, we made it configurable to teach command line. So that's your contribution as well. Storytelling, because again, calling a command a spell, or calling the CPU the brain of the computer, using simple language really makes it easier to understand complex concepts. Me too, when I'm talking to an academic CS person, or I find very tough to understand things that end up being really simple just because of the terminology, etc. And my point is, spread your passion. So we're all here because we had an experience like the one I was describing before. Maybe your dad got you started with something, explaining you about technology, or you've seen something, some app that inspired you, you played some game and you wanted to hack in it. Everyone here had the privilege of approaching technology because of a lucky experience. And I think we're not doing enough of a good job, or we could certainly improve at spreading it to people that didn't, and sort of changing the stereotype of programming. Everyone could use making a little bit more, if not to become programmers, certainly because being behind how things work is pretty much our nature and what makes us feel accomplished. So again, it's not about creating a generation of Python programmers or engineers. It's about taking that spark that I described you when I was talking about my experience with my dad, and the spark for creation and making and designing and being behind things, and spreading it to as many people as we can, so we can create a community of developers or tech people that will be a more interesting demographic, instead of creating an elite of very low-level specific knowledge. So let's try to create the spark and reproduce it in our daily life. I explained you how we're doing with Kano, and that's pretty much it from me.